Welcome back to lab number 2 of the NSX4 Install Configure Manage class. Now, this lab, we're actually going to actively do some things, unlike lab 1, where we were just kind of reviewing. Right? This is still just kind of dipping our toes into the environment, learning a little bit about how everything's laid out, but we're going to actively work through some of the user interface. So what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to talk about accessing the lab environment very briefly because, as you can see, we're already here. We're going to get everything set up for the lab. We're going to validate licensing for vCenter and ESXi and for NSX Manager. Now, licensing should all be just fine, but we want to double check now at the beginning rather than find out when we actually start to do something that ends up, pushing us back a long time because we have to go and relicense everything. So we're going to validate licensing. Then we're going to look at the NSX Manager cluster. Now, it's just a single node cluster in our environment. We call this a singleton NSX Manager. And it's a supported configuration, but most of the time in production, you're going to work with a 3-node management cluster. You're not going to work with a single NSX manager. We're going to do 3 nodes. So we want to keep that in mind. This is not exactly a production-ready environment, but most labs certainly are not production-ready environments. So we're going to look at that NSX manager cluster information, and then we're going to register a compute manager. So we're going to register our vCenter server with NSX so that we can use that later. So what's our first step here? Well, the first step is accessing the lab environment, and that's what we're looking at. We're in the lab environment right now. If you haven't yet, then go ahead and find the email from VMware Learning Platform with your lab access link, and go ahead and get logged in. Once we're done with that, we want to go through our preparing for the lab. Now, preparing for the lab, this task rather, is in every one of our labs. We want to make sure you know the things that you're going to need to access everything for this lab. So we're going to go ahead and open Chrome. That's going to be what we're using for our browser. I know we've got Firefox installed. You can see Firefox down in the taskbar here, but we're not going to use that for much. Right? Chrome is the browser that we assume you're going to use, and that's what has everything predefined and preset. So we're going to go ahead and open Chrome. Now, whether you use the desktop shortcut or the system tray shortcut, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. When you log in, we've got, or not log in, but open Chrome rather, we have 2 tabs that open up by default. This first one just says log in, right? This is to vSphere. And so we're going to go ahead and log in, administrator at vSphere. Instead of doing that, let's go ahead and just copy and paste. Because I have this information here. I'm just going to make that copy, paste. I'll just copy and paste the password. Let's be careful that we only have that information. Now, if you did not create this text file in the previous lab, that's fine. Your lab guide gives you these credentials. It actually spells out your username and password for your vSphere client. So we've got that. Now, we've got this bar up here to get future Google Chrome updates. We can go ahead and close that. Let's give ourselves just a little tiny bit more real estate here. There we go. So this is our vCenter client, right? The vSphere client. This is attached to vCenter. Now we'll also come over to this second tab. This is for the NSX UI. Now by default, these 2 tabs open. You watched that. If you need to open another tab, right? The NSX Manager is right here under the NSX bookmark menu. The vSphere client is right under the vSphere menu. So if you have to open one of those again, that's fine. The bookmarks are right there. Now, we're getting a self-signed certificate issue, right? The certificate authority is invalid here. That's fine. We're using self-signed certificates in our lab environment. So we want to come in under Advanced and click on Proceed to SA NSX Manager 01. Here, we're going to do the same thing that you just saw me do with the vSphere client, where I'm going to copy and paste my username and password, and you can type them, you can copy and paste. That's all up to you. But I'm going to copy and paste here. I know it takes me an extra minute, but sometimes behavior in these virtual machine consoles get a little wacky. So I'm going to go ahead and work with that. Now we can, if we want, go ahead and close this message that says you've not configured backups. That's fine. We're not worried about that. I'm going to close that and give us just a little bit more real estate here on this screen as well. And that's all there is to task number 2. Now, in task number 3, we're going to go back to vCenter. We're going to go look at licensing for our ESXi hosts, for our vCenter server, all that kind of stuff. So we need to go back to this first tab, and we need to come to this little 3-bar menu up here at the top and come down to administration, because this is where all of the system level stuff is for vCenter. So we're looking for licensing in particular. So let's select licenses. And we're going to come over here to assets. Under assets, we're going to see our vCenter systems, our hosts, vSAN clusters, supervisor clusters for Tanzu integration, other solutions, things like that. Here, we're really just looking for vCenter at this point. So savcsa01.vclass.local, that is our vCenter server. And what we want to look at, we are licensed, and the license expiration says 12/30 of 2024. Now, depending on when you're watching this, that may or may not be soon. As I'm recording it, that's not very soon. We have plenty of time. So vCenter server is licensed. Now, if you are getting here closer to this expiration date, there are steps in the lab guide to go out and get new licenses so that you can relicense all of this infrastructure. But here we're okay. So I'm going to go over to the hosts tab, and here we see 4 different hosts, and you can see they're kind of jumbled up. That's okay. All right, ESXi2, ESXi1, then 4, then 3. If you want to sort them, that's great. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about just seeing a green check mark over here in license expiration. And we see here that these are all going to expire on December 30 of 2024, just like the vCenter license. So everything here is licensed and is just fine. At this point, let's go back to NSX Manager. This is, after all, a class and a set of labs about NSX. So here, we want to look at the NSX Manager configuration. So let's come over to the System tab up at the top. And we see in our system overview that we've got 3 valid certificates. They are self-signed, but there are 3 valid certificates. We've got 3 with private key. 3 of them are in use. Those are our system certificates. We have 1 NSX management node and some other stuff going on. I can click on the NSX management node here, or I can come in here under the configuration header and I can click appliances. This will take me to the same place either way. And what we're going to see when this loads up is that we've got a couple of messages here. We're not worried about these right now. We can see that our cluster is stable. We can see that we have 1 NSX manager at 172.20.10.41. It's got a system load, a 15-minute system load average of 1.73, which is fairly low, and an 18 gigabyte memory usage out of 23 gigabytes allocated. Right, there's 6 virtual CPUs allocated to this. So we get some good numbers here, just some simple information about what's going on. Now we can safely ignore these warnings, right? I kind of glossed over that a second ago, but we can safely ignore those. We're not that worried about it. What we want to look at now, though, is under settings here over on the left-hand navigation. Under settings, we want to come in here to licenses, because that's something else we want to look at. We want to validate that we have some licenses. And we can see that we've got an NSX Data Center Enterprise Plus license. In this case, it never expires. We have an NSX firewall with advanced threat prevention, and I can go ahead and expand this column out so we can see that entire title. Right, that expires on December 30th, 2024, just like my vCenter licenses. We also have an NSX for vShield endpoint license. That's something that's simply going to be there, and it's not going to expire. So there, we're good with task number 4. So, what's next? Task number 5 is where we're going to get into the command line. And what we're going to do is open up MT Putty. Now, MT Putty is this little console that looks like it's got some tabs on it. It's this little icon down here on the system tray. We'll go ahead and launch that. And we want to connect to our NSX Manager system. That name is SA-NSX Manager-01, right? This one right here, first one under NSX Inventory. Now, here we've got all of our credentials pre-saved, so I should just double-click on it, and we should get logged in here in just a second. And there we are. We're at the command prompt for the NSX CLI on NSX Manager 01. Now, the first thing we want to do here is run the set CLI timeout command. Now, what we're doing here is not something we're probably going to do in a production environment. What we're changing is the timer that will automatically disconnect an idle logged in session, this command line session. Setting this timeout to 0 disables that timer. That's something you're not going to do in a real environment. In a lab, perhaps so. But for all manner of compliance reasons, we do not want to set that to 0 outside of a lab. So that's the command you'll use to change that timeout to meet whatever security requirements you might have. We're also going to change the same timeout, the login timeout, for the web client, for the NSX web UI. And we're not going to do that with a set web timeout or anything like that. We're actually changing the HTTP service. So we're running the set service HTTP command. With the session timeout variable set to 0. Again, that's going to turn off the session timer so that my idle web UI sessions are not disconnected. But this doesn't take effect immediately. The set CLI timeout command, that took effect immediately. I don't have to worry about that. The service change, right? We're changing the configuration of the web service. So I have to restart the UI for that to take effect. So I do that with the restart service command. And we have a very creatively named UI service that we're going to restart. And this will take us just a minute to restart, and there it goes. Something to note here is this did disconnect my my web session, right? Because we stopped the UI service and restarted the UI service. So I'm going to have to log in again to NSX Manager, but that'll be the last time I have to log into NSX Manager for the duration of the class, unless I actively log out. So that's just some stuff that we're doing to make your labs a little bit easier, right? We don't want you to worry about having to log in and log out and log in and log out all the time. So that's just lab housekeeping, if you will. Now, we've got that done. We want to take a look at the manager cluster. We do that with the get cluster status command. That's going to give us a view of the different service groups and what their state is. So let's scroll back up just a little bit here so we get to the top of the screen. And notice that kind of scrolled everything off. And this will show each cluster group, right? So here we've got our cluster ID, and then what's the overall status of the cluster, right? The manager cluster is currently stable. Hopefully, it's stable for yours. If not, maybe we need to wait a couple of minutes. Maybe your lab just started up and you zipped right into lab number 2. So maybe we still have to wait. So if it says degraded, give it a couple of minutes, right? Give it 5 minutes, 10 minutes. before you start worrying about anything, and then just rerun the command again. Now, what kind of things do we see here? Well, here we're looking at a service group. This is the data store service group. This is the distributed database is what this is. And we can see that this is stable and the status is up for SA-NSX Manager 01. And that's what we want to see for all of the different service groups. And we can see the different stanzas for the different service groups. There's our cluster boot manager, and there's the controller role and the manager role, and so on and so forth. So we can go through and look at all of these, the compute manager inventory, IDPS reporting, all kinds of stuff is here. So the fact that all of these say up and our overall cluster status is stable, well, that's a pretty good sign, right? That's a really, really good sign. That tells us our manager is healthy right now. So that's what we want to see. So now we want to go back into the UI and we want to go register a compute manager. And we'll do that under the Fabric menu. That's very interesting that we haven't had to relog in. And we'll come in under Compute Managers. And what we want to do is we want to add a compute manager. We want to give this some kind of a name. A lot of the time, we will simply use the host name. That way we know what it is. We probably want to add a description of some kind. This is my lab vCenter server. The FQDN here is, well, we're not going to use FQDN. We're going to use the IP address. It's 172.20.10.94. That's it. All this information is going to be in your lab guide. So, don't think that I'm just making it up as we go along. We want to go ahead and leave the HTTPS port alone. We want our credentials. Now, I'm going to come back into my text file. Copy and paste that vCenter username and password one more time. There's that. Now, we've got our SHA-256 thumbprint. We're not going to plug that in. If you happen to know the thumbprint for your vCenter certificate, this is where you would put that. Otherwise, you'll see here in just a second, we're going to discover that. We want to go ahead and create a service account. You look at the tooltip. This is for things like vSphere Lifecycle Manager. So if we're using vSphere Lifecycle Manager, we want that. We want to go ahead and enable trust. And if we look at that, this is for Compute Manager, right? Do we want to trust our Compute Manager? Do we want to trust our vCenter server? In this case, yes, we do. And we're going to go ahead and leave this at full access for the access level, right? And, we could simply bring that down to limited access if we're only using vSphere Lifecycle Manager. If we're using vSphere for Kubernetes, we would need to add full access. We would need to change that to full access. Again, for our purposes, this is a lab environment. Our primary concern is not security, so we're going to leave these kind of at the defaults, and we're going to go ahead and add the compute manager. We get this warning here that says, well, we don't have a thumbprint. This is what we discovered connecting to that IP address. Is that what you want to use? Yes. In this case, we want to go ahead and click add. We're going to get our please wait while it caches that thumbprint. And there we go. Now we can see we've got our compute manager, savcsa01.vclass.local. Notice I have a typo here. That's okay. It's just an object name. The UUID is what we're actually working with behind the scenes. We see that's at 172.20.10.94. It's a vCenter server. Registration is in process. We are connecting. Now, we can go ahead and leave that as is and let it wait. Or if you're impatient, you can come down. Oh, I didn't even get to click refresh. We went ahead and popped up with our registered and up. And that's what we want to see. Now, if you need to, we can go ahead and click this refresh button down here at the bottom of the page, and that should force a refresh as well. But what we want to see here is that we've got vCenter version 7.0.3. Our registration status is registered and the connection state is up. So that goes ahead and wraps up lab number 2